Our next speaker, Mr. Abed Shaheen, COO at Info4. Info4 is the leading information management solutions provider in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Info4 helps its clients from SMEs to Fortune 500 companies to secure, better manage their data, digitize, and automate their manual process. Abed is responsible for positioning the company, developing and driving its global strategy, and leading its expansion and growth. He has grown the company to become today the leader in more than 20 countries. It's currently driving its expansion and acquisition strategy into key growth markets and leading its digital transformation. Abed is passionate about strategy, leadership, innovation, ecosystems, startups, technology, and empowering information-driven sustainability initiatives. He recently launched skillpowerment.com, a platform that aims to battle youth unemployment and its related poverty through connecting youth to companies for real market-based skill sharing. Abed holds a BS degree in computer science and also received his MBA from Bowling Green State University. Moreover, he has completed executive management programs at MIT, USA, IMD, and Singularity University, San Francisco. He's an active member of the Aramex Global Management Team, its Information Security Council, a member of the Executive Leadership Council at the Association for Information and Image Management, the Young Presidents Organization, and fellow of the Aspen Institute's Middle East Leadership Initiative. He's passionate about writing and speaking on topics related to strategy, innovation, information management, and governance. Please welcome Mr. Abed Shaheen.
Okay, that was a very long introduction. All right, thank you, Lama, for the introduction, and thank you everybody for being here, on your weekend. And thank you for Dr. Osman for inviting me to, to be back to AUB 15 years later. I didn't actually graduate from AUB. I still have 6 courses left. But I think because AUB is now AACSB accredited, I can transfer credit back and graduate without taking any courses. So, walking back, on campus yesterday and today brought back so many memories. And I was telling an ex-classmate of mine, Nadine, who is also a professor today at AUB, and whom I met 15 years later, how AUB is actually a perfect bubble. It's a bubble within a city. It's a much-needed bubble to remain sane and to make use of that bubble to make change. You walk into AUB, everything is perfect. You walk out, you hit reality. You walk in, you see green streets, greenery, you see clean streets, you don't see trash, a proper internet, solar panels. You walk out, reality hits you. This conference by itself as well is also a bubble within the bubble. We're talking here, and I'm listening here yesterday and today as well, about big data and advanced analytics, about advanced AI, and you name it. And then you realize quickly that most of the speakers are implying, directly or indirectly, that all these are very nice concepts, but somewhere else, not here. And some of them went to an extent talking about how we actually need internet to start with, basics. So, but don't worry, I'm not that pessimistic. I'm going to use all this to show how we can change things. The other reality check that I cannot ignore, and I talked about this a little bit earlier as well with Lama and some other people outside, is the fact that what I was hoping to see is that AUB actually, the bubble infects the greater society instead of the greater society infects AUB with the Lebanese epidemics. And so AUB graduates every year, hundreds of students. A lot of these are females. And we have graduated thousands of very capable females and, women who are today extremely capable and knowledgeable in the topics, and they can be with us today. And so far, we didn't see a single female talking about anything that has to do with technology, except for the ladies who are helping us with the awards and introductions and moderators. Yeah, but I think AUB should do better than this, really, and should make it a point to act as a role model for the Lebanese society and to infect this back instead of being infected. So I hope the next conferences, what we'll have is we won't have conferences unless we have at least 50% female speakers on all panels. Now, having said that, my session today is about digital globalization and data flows, yeah? And what I want to talk about is why data is important to start with. Why are we talking anyway about big data? Why this topic came up? And what's really changing in terms of globalization? Because the very own definition of globalization is today changing from being physical to digital. And how can we make use of all these really reality checks that I talked about to turn them back to our benefit? But before I do that, I'm going to hit you with even more reality checks. Things that I've seen in the last few months from my travels or whatever I read, and how they also relate to what speakers were talking about yesterday. Yeah? I'm going to use all of this again to show how we can actually improve and do things better, because if we don't, we're going to be in a completely disastrous situation, way more than what we have today. This is from Bloomberg 2 days ago. They're casting their votes in the United States from the International Space Station, yeah? And we cannot even count votes properly over here. This is from my way from Cyprus to Beirut, 25 minutes flight, and all you see is windmills just 25 minutes away from here. It doesn't take much to do it over here. Estonia is importing rubbish to keep their power plants running. I went to Estonia last year, and I gave my government, the Estonian government, my data, and they gave me this ID. And today they guarantee my digital identity, and they gave me an e-citizenship. It doesn't make me travel better, but it's an e-citizenship and e-residency, where they authenticate my digital transactions. Now, as soon as I got the ID, in 5 minutes, I could open bank accounts online, I could open companies in Estonia online, I could transact online. Whatever I need to do, I swipe my ID on my laptop, and the government authenticates me. That's in San Francisco again, this year in March. Smart solar-powered, cloud-connected trash recycling bins. The trash bins tells the trash collectors when the bin is full. It also recycles them, and it's also a Wi-Fi network. This is a solar panel, again, in September, bench with free Wi-Fi, spread all around the city in Croatia. Singapore residents, they now, have autonomous cars. And if you go to San Francisco as well, you can order your Uber autonomous car. And you can only imagine what would happen when this becomes reality everywhere in a few years, and we don't have proper roads to start with in Lebanon. So we need to think about the non-physical, because the physical is gone. I don't really see any possibility of us competing or tapping into physical. We have to go to digital, otherwise we won't be able to have a proper country to live in anyway. Uber's trucks, completely autonomous. They made their first delivery with 50,000 beers on them. This is just a few days ago. This is us. This is Earth. This white dot from 100 million miles away, and this is taken from the Cassini spacecraft while capturing Saturn's rings. This small dot shows you how we're actually totally insignificant as Earth in general, let alone this small country that wants to keep talking about corruption and basic issues. And if we don't really wake up to and understand the reality, we're going to remain in even insignificant in the history books that we are so proud of. So my session is about globalization and digital globalization and data flows and what's really happening, how globalization is actually changing how data is changing the definition of globalization to include the digital aspect of it and to really exclude slowly the rest of the elements of globalization. And that's what I hope to do, is to tap into what can we do, knowing that globalization have changed. What can we do to benefit from whatever we have, which is mostly the talent and the soft skills that we can develop and capitalize on. So globalization is usually the international movement of goods, services, and money. That's where it was the case. That's how people defined it. And what's happening today is that it's being more and more about data rather than just goods, services, and money. And I'm going to show you statistics, and a lot of these are taken from a McKinsey study. So they're referenced, and you can have access to this study if you want. Just email me at the end of it, and I'll send you the whole study and the presentation. So the world economy today is more interconnected than ever. 25 years ago, the value of the global trade in goods, services, and flows of finance, it was 25% of the global GDP. Today, it's 40%. So there's a jump, yeah? And we're going to follow this logic to see what exactly happened. So more countries are connected, we know that, and the connections between countries are now deeper and deeper. And back in 1990, for example, there was 400 million foreign trips abroad, and this number is today over 11 billion. So there's more movement in people and data and connections. So what happened? Why did we really jump from 25% to 40%? And there's no doubt about globalization. We can argue against it, but it's like arguing against history. We have to make use of globalization and what we have to improve rather than just fight it. But it will definitely increase the ability of companies to get talent and best ideas. It will enable countries to specialize. It will enable us to become much more efficient and to raise productivity and innovate. And all this was happening anyway. Yeah, for the last hundreds of years, this was happening. However, when you add the technology mix to the picture, things change and they accelerate and they move much faster than before. And we're going to show you how this is happening. This is the cross-border data flows between countries. And you can see how 2005, this was 4.7 terabytes per second. 2014, it's 45 times larger. More and more individuals are participating today in globalization. 914 million users on social networking and social media tools, they have at least one foreign connection. Yeah, this will show you again data flows and what's happening. There's 429 million international travelers, 361 cross-border e-commerce shoppers. There's 244 million people living outside their home countries. There's 44 cross-border online workers, 13 million cross-border online students, 5 million students studying abroad. Yeah, all this shows you what's happening with data. For the first time in history, emerging markets are today involved in more than 50% of the global trade transactions. Over the last 10 years, the opponents to global flows have raised the world GDP by at least 10%. So that was $7.8 trillion in 2014. Out of this, 2.8 trillion were in data flows. And this figure is increasing and increasing year over year. This shows you how emerging countries are now involved in more than half of the world's goods trade. So what happened? Yeah, why did we have this jump? Why are we here at 40% today of the global GDP? So global financial flows have collapsed since 2008. So it's not about financial flows increasing that percentage. Global trade is flat. We all see it, from retail outlets that are empty, from malls that are completely out of people today, to retail shops closing down, and you name it. But globalization is not heading into reverse. We're actually advancing. We're solving a lot of problems in the world. We're solving diseases. We're living longer. We're advancing, as you saw in the other previous slides. There's advance everywhere, regardless of our small issues. There's human advancement all across. So what's happening is that instead of just focusing on goods and services and financial flows, data flows came to the picture. And this was the hidden element that nobody could see. So data is not only entering the globalization definition, it's also coming in at soaring speed and flows. And why the world has changed and the way we connected have changed, even the nature of connection itself have changed. And we will see how. Global data flows exploded. And they grew by 45 times in less than 10 years. And they're going to grow by that's the projection, by 9 times more in the next 5 years because of flows of information and searches and video and communication and you name it, as it becomes cheaper and cheaper. Virtually every type of cross-border transaction today has a digital component, even if it's pure trade or money related. The explosion of data contributes to up to $3 trillion of GDP elements added to the global economy. That was 2014. And what's important than all of this is that data flows has been emerging for less than 20 years, while trade flows have been there for the last 200 years. And you can see how data is going to become more and more important. And that's why we're here today, to see why exactly do we have all this big data to start with. This shows you how trade in goods have been declining since 2008 onwards, and you can see the decline, how it went down, then improved a little bit, and now it's in decline again. After 20 years of rapid growth, that the flow of goods, services, and finance have declined relative to the global GDP by about 13 percentage points. Trade has declined in half of the intermediate goods categories, which are, for example, chemicals, paper, communication equipment, fertilizers, textiles, steel, and other things. And the only increasing categories today are aircraft parts, vehicle parts, pharmaceutical inputs, telephone, microphones, and some other ones, most related to movement of people and to travel and to communication. That's the actual growth in bandwidth, 45 times in the past decade. And the forecast, you can see it's exponential growth now, unstoppable really. It's beyond comprehension what we have in terms of data. It's beyond big data now. The term they're using is even complex data and extreme data. This is an animation of the actual global data flow. Look how it's changing. Inter-regional and intra-regional. And you can see the gigabits per second, how they're changing throughout the years. From 2005, how it's adding up and growing exponentially until 2014, where you can see both growing, the intra-regional and the inter-regional. So, for the last 20 years, from 1985 to 2007, the global trade in goods grew by twice the world GDP. Yeah? And as a result of that, 13% of the global GDP picked up to a peak of 26% in 2007. So if you look at the relative growth compared to the world economy, you can see that the trade has been actually down, although it's improved in percentage, but in terms of in the relative position, it's not. And you might think that this is cyclical because there's weak demand in the US or Europe or Japan, or because there's a collapse in commodity prices, for example, that lowered that affected this. But it's not. It's because the issue is much deeper than this. And even big data and analytics can help us understand the issue even better. And that's this study that I'm referring to, the McKinsey study, will actually detail how they came up with all this analysis. So there's a structural change today in decisions about where products should be located. And this impacts trade, and this impacts the flow of goods and money and so forth. Labor costs are no more important, yeah, and they're not the major factor in world trade. The previous raw material, they're being changed. Labor is not one of them anymore. Data is the new oil, as they say, and the new raw material, and it's changing the actual structure of organizations and factories and where products should be made and when should be made and so forth. So speed to market, energy costs, the quality of talent, and the quality of the infrastructure are becoming much more important than labor and infrastructure by itself and capacity. So all this means that the global value chains and supply chains are being reconfigured, and they're getting closer and closer to the end user, and you will see very soon, well, in some countries it already exists with 3D printing, how the logistics industry is going to suffer. We won't have these international shipments anymore. People are going to buy designs. They're already doing it. I do it. You buy the design, you download it, and you have the printer print whatever you want to do or whatever you want to use. This will even have a major effect on global trade, but it will also increase the need for more and more data and bandwidth and infrastructure. So what's driving all of this? Yeah? 900 million people have international connections on social media. A lot of activities linked to data are actually linked to trade, services, and the exchange of ideas globally. And a lot of services are becoming digitized by themselves. A lot of devices, physical devices, they no longer exist. The GPS device has been replaced with the software. The flashlight is now a feature on the iPhone. And as we go further and further, we will see more and more dematerialization of objects into software and technology and features rather than actual physical products. And the non-digital trade of goods is not peaking, is actually declining. These are the active users on platforms. fourth quarter 2015. Of course, it has increased by much more since then. That's Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, WeChat, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. You can see populations that are bigger than countries and continents. By 2020, 940 online shoppers are expected to spend almost $1 trillion on cross-border e-commerce transactions. And this shows you how the figure is growing by 22%, 27% per annum from 2014 onwards. The global B2C e-commerce shoppers, you can see how they're growing, whether they're domestic or cross-border, and how they're going to reach 2.1 million by 2020. So there is a massive democratization of the global economy. What's happening is what was earlier accessible only to large corporations and multinationals, because of the previous way of how globalization was defined, is today available to any startup or small company or SME in any country, in any city. And you will see later how cities are actually becoming much more important than countries today in the global economy. 50 million small businesses today are on Facebook, and 30% of their fans are from other countries. Alibaba in China has 10 million small and medium-sized companies selling products to the rest of the world. Amazon has 2 million small businesses. eBay, the share of eBay, commercial sellers and offline enterprises, you can see the difference. The eBay sellers are much more than the rest of the enterprises in China, India, and the rest of the countries. There are more companies selling online than physical companies selling goods. 50 million SMEs are using Facebook to find customers, and you can see how this figure is growing. So the opportunities and these reality checks that I talked about, they actually create something good. So we're in an era where we need digital policies, specifically in this country. We don't have to become Silicon Valley, and we don't need to build it, but we need to have the digital infrastructure in place first. Yeah, we need internet access, broadband access, reasonable prices for people to access this, and digital literacy skills. And the Masters program, for example, analytics that Dr. Osman mentioned, is wonderful news, because this will keep improving on what we lack the most. The good thing is that the total gap to the best frontier is about 10% as much contribution to the global economy. In other words, it means the global economy is $10 trillion today smaller than it could be if we have more connectedness and global flows. And as you see, very few countries over here are contributing today to this global data flow and connectivity. You can see countries like Singapore, the US, Netherlands, Ireland, United Kingdom that stand out. One of the Arab countries that you see here is the United Arab Emirates, which is on the way to going up further and further. And as you notice, Singapore is a small country, Netherlands is small, Ireland is small. You don't need to be a large country anymore to compete and to really access the global data flows. And you can capitalize on being small as well by tapping into the talent and the soft skills, rather than tapping into infrastructure and physical products and exports and worrying about the border from the south or the north if they're closed. There's way beyond that to do and to really think about. These are the cities and how they actually rank in terms of the flow of goods, services, financials, and people. You can see the only city in our region that stands out is Dubai when it comes to goods. Again, when it comes to goods, services, and people. When it comes to financial flows, but not in data. We're still way behind in the region. And these cities are actually, they get repeated. But what you can see over here are cities that you have never heard of. And cities today and tomorrow are going to be the main contributors to the global economy instead of countries. So cities are going to compete globally and have even diplomatic relations with other cities and bypass governments altogether. And you can see cities like Ningbo, like Busan, like Port Klang, cities that we haven't heard of, and they are participating heavily in the global economy and global data flows, and these are the ones that will actually matter in the future. So there's no reason why not Beirut, for example, can become, if we tap into the right mindset and we enable the interaction and the connectivity to the global data flows instead of focusing on the actual physical infrastructures and export of goods and apples and I don't know, all these things that keep coming up. And you see here the flows, how they remain concentrated within a few countries. But this also means that, so if there's few companies selling a product, this also means there's a lot of opportunities for others to come in. Yeah? So the opportunity is there. It's now how do we tap into it. So this is not a threat. The digital globalization is not a threat. It might be a threat today because we're left behind, but it's actually a major opportunity. It's a major opportunity for us, for companies, and for us today as a country over here to think about who is actually my competitor. Does it matter if we have problems on borders, both sides? Does it matter if we cannot export products? Does it matter if we don't have this or that? What do we really want to compete on? Is it soft skills and digital skills and exporting talent, or we need to continue to, to look in the past where goods, physical goods and services and financial flows are important? This is no longer the case. Digital flows are going to define future growth and not physical flows anymore. And the reality check that I talked about earlier, about how most of what we talked about in this conference are actually not applicable here. If you actually go and analyze who's actually doing this, a lot of the AUB graduates are actually implementing all of these technological advancements elsewhere. Wherever you go, you find somebody who you met at AUB or who graduated from AUB that's actually involved in these technological implementations. So we really have something, but we don't have it over here. And usually, this is a nice statistic that I read about. Trade goes down by a factor of 2 every 100 kilometers from wherever you stand. However, with digital flows, the elasticity of trade has been cut by half. So this means that actually people can go twice as far in geography, in the geography of trade. So this will enable us to, even within our location in the Mediterranean, to actually do much more by tapping into the global data flows. So thank you very much. And if you need any of this material, just email me on this email, and I'll send you the presentation and even the studies that I used to come out of this. It is already. Yeah.
Because we'll put them in one and share.
Yeah, sure.
The screen.
Okay.
System.
It's
already fine.
It's already here.
Abed, we don't have much female representation in this conference. This is because AUB and Stanford are organizing a Women in Data Science conference in February. So I will invite you to join and, to listen to the female speakers in data science on February.